Hi, so welcome everyone to this panel discussion on biodiversity and natural capital's investment potential. So I'll be your moderator for today. I'm Mona Huis, working at Mercer in the impact team. So biodiversity is more and more an important topic in terms of investments, and I'd like to discover and uncover that a little bit more with my panelists today. So the idea of this panel discussion is going to provide you with the keys to where to start in biodiversity investments and hear about some other of your colleagues which have been gone through this journey of biodiversity as well. So how it will work in terms of organization, we'll have this discussion together, which I will moderate, and then we will leave time also for Q&A at the end, so please keep in mind your questions. So maybe as a starter, I'd like you to introduce yourself very shortly, maybe starting with Tanja.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Tanja Dietrich-Hübner. I'm working for Rewe International. We are one of the leading food retailers in Austria and drugstores. We are operating under the brands of Billa and Bippa and Penny. And I was responsible for the sustainability department. I'm with Rewe since 14 years, and now I changed to another department, public affairs, to be more involved in the stakeholder engagement. And yeah, and one of our big highlights, and this is one reason why I'm here, is that we started a foundation in 2015. And later on, I will tell you a little bit more why we did that.
Thank you. Paul?
Thanks, Mona. Hi, everyone. Paul Chatterton. I lead the Landscape Finance Lab based here in Vienna. We aim to solve two big problems. One is that nature works at the scale of hundreds of thousands to millions of hectares, but most of our actions are much smaller than that. How do we get up to that scale, and particularly landscape scale? That's the one problem. The other is that most of the funding for nature is grant finance, which is not the right thing for long-term change. You need much more money, larger scale, longer term. So the Landscape Finance Lab is set up to incubate landscapes and get finance into them. Large money into large landscapes over long term for big change.
Thank you. Sylvia?
Yeah, hello, I'm Sylvia Wisniewski. I'm CEO of Finance in Motion. We are a specialized impact asset manager. So I'm talking about, investing into our natural capital, activities. And perhaps one or the other may think, okay, how does that work? So I hope I can bring, to the audience here some concrete examples of how you can actually do good investments, which are, from a risk-return perspective, robust, but at the same time also deliver credible positive impact for nature. Just to mention a little bit what kind of investment strategy we're following. We're actually investing in a liquid investment strategy, so predominantly private debt. And we predominantly follow secular investment strategies around climate. And that also includes then investments into the sustainable use of natural resources. Perhaps to put some numbers on the table, because I think we all are concerned about scale, how to really make sure that we have a massive impact. A massive impact requires also massive investments. We currently run a portfolio of 4 billion euro and invest in more than 40 countries, more than 200 portfolio companies. And since our foundation in 2009, we delivered an accumulative investment volume of 9 billion euro.
Thank you. Ivo?
Wonderful. Really glad to be on that panel, and really glad that this panel is happening in such a forum. Biodiversity is really at the center stage, and that is so important. I'm Ivo. I'm one of the co-founders and managing director of Climate Farmers. Climate Farmers is a mission-first company that has been founded in 2019. with the mission to build the infrastructure for scaling regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is a topic that has gone from absolute niche before 2019 to extremely quickly into the mainstream in 1 or 2 years. And it's one of these cases where we see hypergrowth and we see the problems of hypergrowth because this space is growing without the necessary infrastructure and understanding what it is, how it works, how we can support it, how we can monitor it, how we can certify it, and how we can really have sustainable growth in this space. So we understand our role to build the necessary infrastructures under this growing trend of regenerative agriculture. And when we say infrastructure, we mean social infrastructure, so building the farmers' movement, the bottom-up farmer movement to understand what regenerative agriculture actually is and support farmers on the ground every day in their challenges in the transition. And then to build the monitoring systems, to build the frameworks, to build the ways to invest in biodiversity, build the ways to invest in land, build the ways to invest in carbon capture. The finance instruments and then the policy. So we're working a lot with national governments, with the EU governments on building the policies that will actually support the transition to a regenerative agri-food system. And finally, the conversation on investing in this space, because this is not a SaaS business model, right? We cannot invest in regenerative agriculture in the way that we invest in software. And so how do you invest in systemic shift in the agri-food sector? And how do we think about that? How do we make that paradigm shift in our way of thinking about it is a topic that gains more and more importance.
And then Günther.
Yeah, last but not least, my name is Günther. Hello from my side. I'm working for VBV. VBV is a pension fund here in Austria. Since we were founded, sustainable investing was always kind of key for us. And therefore, we're also working on integrating biodiversity in our investment decisions, in our investment process. And I'm happy to join this discussion today.
Thank you very much, all of you. Maybe as a starting point, I'd like to turn to Tanya and kind of understand your journey towards biodiversity integration, especially as a food distributor, but also as part of the foundation. I was kind of wondering, how do you approach biodiversity? Is it from more regulatory perspective, because you have to integrate this with a regulatory standpoint, or how did it start? How was the journey to integrate biodiversity?
Well, we as somebody who are selling a lot of fresh fruits, of fresh vegetables, and food in general, we are dependent on biodiversity. That's for sure. And so our company knows that we have a responsibility in this direction from the very beginning, I think. But especially we started with a pesticide reduction program 20 years or 22 years ago. We have the first organic brand in Austria from a supermarket, a private label. So we are used to think about biodiversity measures and issues in agriculture. But the whole regulation is now again a push for us to reconsider what we are doing, and are we doing it in the right direction and with the right targets, yes. And the reason why we started with the Biodiversity Foundation was one reason was that we didn't want to be in the operating business, because the retail is a very quick, very fast business. The budgets for sustainability are usually for 1 year or maybe 2 years, and this is far too short if you want to invest in biodiversity measures. And we wanted to do something in our supply chain. So we started with farmers in Styria, in south of Styria, where we have a lot of apple plantations, and they got money, or other farmers got money to pull out the, do you say hedges? Hedges? Hecken? Hedges? Yeah, sorry. Hedges. Yeah, to pull them out. Yeah, they got money, and now we pay them that they bring back hedges or small green meadows that the insects find a place where they can survive in an intensive agricultural production. And so I think it was a very good idea to bring this biodiversity project into our foundation, and especially because we want to leverage money, public money as well. So we start to invest in projects, and then we ask other investors, or especially from the public side, if they want to invest too. And this is so we really could leverage money, I think 50 to 100% of what we give in, yes. And in the last 3 years, we invested around 1.5 million euros to several projects. And we are focusing on Austria because here we can make a change. And we have around 50% of our fruits and vegetables are coming from Austria, if you have the whole year, because there is a lot of seasons, but we want to stay here in Austria with our funds and help to regenerate agricultural regions.
Yeah, locally more. Yeah, it reminds me, Yvonne, of our discussions around you really need the supply chain and the procurement team to work on the topic of regenerative agriculture and biodiversity in general, but just so that I will give you the ground now, just also to kind of present your journey to regenerative agriculture and kind of giving your on-the-ground expertise of this would be interesting as well.
Wonderful, yeah, and thank you for this. So my background, I've grown up on a farm, and there's a saying of the bananas and the republics. I see the same with people and farms. You can take the person out of the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the person. So a lot of people that I see that have grown up on farms eventually want to get back into this. And the problem we all see is, well, life on a farm, to be honest, is a pretty miserable existence. It's wonderful in terms of living close to nature and working on this, but it's also in terms of what you can do. It is extremely, extremely tough. And so the question is, how do you create the kind of system impact that we want to see while working in agriculture? For me, regenerative agriculture has always been the way that we can really transform not only the agriculture sector, but really our society. Because essentially, when we look at it, agriculture is the foundation of our society, right? Everything we do is based on agriculture, especially as we phase out fossil fuels, right? So our society is based on soil, and we ignore that entirely in the way that we think about the world. So we have a massive potential if we manage to transition the agriculture sector to one of regeneration, to hopefully also have that influence in our society, to move our society towards a regenerative way of thinking. That's my hope. The reason why now the time has come for regenerative agriculture and why this is growing so fast is because we, for the first time, have the business case for sustainability in a way that we have not had previously as much. So suddenly we see the huge demand for decarbonization. We see the massive impacts of climate change already on supply chains, right? So I know that cocoa, coffee, coconuts, oranges, olive oil, all of these are right now through the roof in terms of prices due to climate change. And this is this year, and next year it's going to be a different crop. Olive oil, we didn't really have a proper harvest in 3 years in the Mediterranean, which is a huge impact on prices there. So the huge potential that we have here, I think, is to move the conversation about the transition of agriculture towards one of regeneration out of the sustainability department and into the procurement department, because it is simply untenable, it is simply not viable to continue procuring from agriculture within climate change. So the way that we are doing agriculture right now, we were discussing before about the question we always get at this panel is like, yeah, well, how are you going to feed the world with regenerative agriculture? The question is reverse. How are you going to feed the world with the current system of agriculture? It is simply not going to work. So the only buffer we have for the impacts we see in agriculture right now is healthy soils. Healthy soils can buffer out floods, can buffer out droughts, and can prevent the diseases that we are seeing as an effect of climate change. So for me, the huge potential and the connection to your work is to see, okay, let's stop. Well, there's always the conversation about the wonderful impacts and the sustainability impacts, but the core point is this is becoming a core strategic decision for companies, for especially food companies, to choose to support farmers in the transition to regenerative agriculture, because biodiversity is a necessity to continue doing business with food.
Thank you. I take more now a helicopter view, maybe with Günther and your own perspective of how you have approached biodiversity within the pension fund. Have you approached it more from a risk perspective, more from an opportunity perspective? How was the journey once again?
Yeah, the journey was, as we heard just before the two participants before talking, that this is an important topic for our society, and therefore it should be also for a pension fund who is taking care of millions of people. And when we made up our thoughts how we handle that, and of course it's a sustainability topic too, and I think it's a kind of involvement of the climate topic maybe. We agreed, of course, that this is important, and then we said we have to do something, and of course it's always hard to do something internal if you don't have any experts in the team who are really familiar with the topic. So we screened the world outside of us and found that there is a kind of foundation, the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation, which is open for new members all over the world, for financial institutions, asset managers, as well as asset owners who are interested in the topic. And therefore we joined them, and they provide a lot of knowledge to us. They have several working groups where we also participate in different manners. And we are still working on implementing a sustainable biodiversity strategy, if I can call it that way, so that biodiversity is something which has to be included in every investment decision within our managers, because as a pension fund, we of course engage with our asset managers, and these asset managers have to engage with the companies. So this is the workflow, usually the way it goes. And yeah, so far this Finance for Biodiversity organization is still growing. For example, this afternoon, when we finished here, I have to leave because there is a kind of target setting workshop where I want to participate, and VBV is going to set targets by the end of this year for next year, which will report it then by the end of next year. So yeah, we are on the journey, we started it, and we invite everybody to join.
And going maybe a bit further away in this path and really trying to understand what are kind of the investment themes which are related to biodiversity, because when you say biodiversity is very large, right? And really trying to find kind of a themes framework to invest in that. I think it's going to be great to hear about Paul, Sylvia as well, around how are you approaching this? Could you explain a little bit more about landscape financing? What does that mean?
Yeah, sure. Last year here we talked about the polycrisis, all of the different crises that are coming together and reinforcing each other. The big report for me last year, at the end of last year, was the Global Tipping Points report. Put your hand up if you've read that. Just a couple of people. I recommend you read it. It's scary as hell. 25 global tipping points, things like the ice caps, the oceans, and so on. So we've got massive change coming, and we need massive solutions to deal with these integrated solutions. And what's exciting is hearing supply chains rethinking themselves and investing in nature, farmers coming together and thinking about regenerative systems. For the Landscape Finance Lab, we focus on 4 systems. Agriculture, because food is the big destroyer of nature, but it can be the big regenerator of nature. And then three biological systems: reefs, rainforests, and peatlands together, particularly wetlands more broadly, contain most of the world's biodiversity, almost all, most of the water systems, most of the natural carbon. And we're trying to help people to build landscape solutions in each of these. We've been working in Fiji with business incubation solutions, with Michelin in Sumatra on a solution for rainforest and rubber production. In Scotland, tomorrow we launch a 400,000 hectare peatland restoration program. That's really big news, very serious stuff. I'm really excited about that. So watch out for that one. That you might hear about it. It's and then what's the other one? Rainforests. Well, yeah, that's something that we've done a lot on. I helped build two of the largest forest carbon programs on the planet, both of them 1.5 times the size of Austria. So it is possible to do these things. It's difficult still to make them commercial, and that's where this lady is spectacular.
Exactly. I mean, you've had like 15 years of experience on this with Finance in Motion, right? So I think you can definitely talk about the different investment themes, what is included, excluded as part of biodiversity.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for, let's say, the flowers, but I think I need to hand this over to my teams, which are out in the field working on this. And certainly we would wish, that we are already, in that sense, looking at full landscapes. But since we need, let's say, investments that really work, in terms of generating a profit, allowing capital to be paid back. So we need to really look at, let's say, sectors that offer investment opportunities which are scalable, while at the same time they offer opportunities to actually change their practices. So if you look at the volumes that are currently spent on ESG investment, broadly speaking, we talk about a $30 trillion market every year. If you look at what goes into biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, you broadly defined, it's 1%. So you see there is much, much more to be done to really bring investments to nature to make sure that nature remains intact and can be reused. I think that's the whole idea of also regenerative agriculture. To make this a little bit more tangible, what do? We have basically 3 main themes. One is to eliminate or reduce, let's say, the triggers for biodiversity loss. The other one is to contribute to positive nature contributions, meaning positive biodiversity contributions. And the last category is that we also want to contribute to conservation. So let me give you a bit, let's say, flesh to the bones, meaning, what does this concretely look like? If we, for example, talk about reducing negative triggers on biodiversity that caused biodiversity loss, you, I think, have all been drinking coffee this morning, I guess. So you may be surprised that in the production of coffee, actually around 2/3 is spent on depulping, meaning to get the cask out of the pulp. I mean, you know that the coffee is in this red little bean-like thing, but the coffee bean is inside, so you need to depulp it, okay? For that, you use tremendous amounts of water. And as you can imagine, in order to peel this off, you end up with a mass which is somewhat water, but also, has fermenting pulp in it. Normally what happens with this is it's just being thrown to the river, or it's just being thrown into the landscapes, As you can imagine, not a very healthy way of disposing this. So what we are, for example, investing into is to have sustainable water systems running on coffee mills, where you basically separate the water for reusage or for harmless reuse in agriculture from the actual pulp mass, which we then use as biomass for producing energy, which is also needed in a coffee mill, because as you imagine, you need to dry the coffee beans. So for that, you need tons of, energy for that. And then you can, in that sense, use very smartly, this mass for, on the one side, producing energy that you need on site, and then on the other side, separating this from water for reusage, or at least not harmful to nature. Then the other theme of, producing positive biodiversity impact, there we are investing heavily in so-called agroforestry systems for coffee, for cocoa, but also silvopastoral systems, where you combine cattle grazing, let's say, with trees, with timber production. Again, we need some sort of scale. They are for coffee, cocoa, cattle. These are really large sectors that lend to this kind of transformation of the business practices or the production practices. And I think it's pretty obvious, if you look at a sun-exposed coffee and then, compared to shade-grown coffee, where you have all sorts of different trees of different altitude, different species and so on combined, obviously this is a much richer ecosystem, than, let's say, sun-exposed coffee alone. And then the other, let's say, indirect effect that you also generate is coffee is extremely sensitive to climate change. So with global warming, what happens is that the soil gets warmer, roots suffer a lot, of the coffee bushes. And in many countries, what you see is basically coffee production is given up. So basically the coffee bushes are torn away, and normally they are replaced by, let's say, annual fruit, which is maize, soy, obviously from a carbon perspective, much less valuable, and also from a biodiversity perspective, much less valuable. So with introducing, let's say, shade systems, we also make sure that coffee production can remain at altitudes, where possibly going forward they would not sustain anymore if they continue with the old practice. And then the third category of conservation, we are also engaged in timber production. So we have timber plantations, timberland, let's say, investments. Just to be upfront clear, our timber plantations, we do not claim that they are biodiversity positive. That's a completely different ball game. They contribute a lot to carbon stocking. I think that claim we can make, but not on the biodiversity side. However, where there is a biodiversity component in it is that we often operate these plantations where you also have pristine forests. And what we do is actually we integrate them into our management. We currently have 54,000 hectares under management. Out of that, 13,500 hectares is conserved land. So we are not commercially exploiting this land. We are there actually to manage it carefully. So, for example, avoid that people go in to take firewood out, or that there's illegal logging taking place and things like that. Just to give you a bit of a size feeling, these 54,000 hectares, this is roughly. How many of you are Austrians? Okay, I guess so. How many live in Vienna? Okay, even more. So there must be a lot of foreigners here as well who live in Vienna. Great. So you need, you know what the coverage is of Vienna. So our 54,000 hectares, that's round about 1.3 times, the coverage of Vienna. And a quarter of that would then be conserved land.
Maybe on the, you talked about what is nature positive, what is not. Maybe Günther, coming to you, also because you're joining this conversation with the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, could you provide us with a definition of what is nature positive? How are you approaching it on your side?
Yeah, for sure. So again, this nature positive topic is something which is the dual return concepts. On one hand, you have the financial return, and on the other hand, you have this social return. How to measure it is a big question which is still discussed not only academically, but also in the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation, which we mentioned before. However, it's our approaches, or the approach we follow is to do a sector analysis, to first have a sector analysis, which sectors are affected or have an impact on biodiversity, And within that sectors, we can set targets then and try to engage in these sectors. So everybody knows that from an just overall speaking look on the topic, that the industry which is having the highest impact on biodiversity is, you know it?
Agriculture?
It's not agriculture, no. Any other guesses? Fossil fuels, that's the correct answer. So if you exclude fossil fuels, you do a lot for biodiversity at the end. Of course, there's agriculture and all these other things are important, but the fossil fuels are the baddest thing for biodiversity. So if you exclude any investments in fossil fuels, you do a lot of positive impact for biodiversity. However, on the other hand, you have to find KPIs in order to get a little bit more sense of feeling how you can measure this nature positive topic. And this is still going on, and for each sector you will have different KPIs, and hopefully you can create nature positive investments.
And Ivo, I guess you are using those KPIs, right? And kind of calculating what is the positive impact for climate, for biodiversity, etc. Can you a bit explain how you're doing this?
Yes, we are doing this, and it is an ongoing challenge. Maybe as an example, I think it's 2 years ago now. I got a call from an offsetting agency platform, and they asked me whether we would do biodiversity offsets, and I was like, biodiversity offsets? Let me hear more. So, well, they have this client in mining, and they unfortunately have to cut down this pristine rainforest in South America. But they are very interested in offsetting that with regenerative agriculture. They would love to do something in Germany. And it took me a moment to realize what we are talking about. We are talking about compensating, cutting down a pristine rainforest with hedges and rain and worms, and yes, that's good, obviously, but we cannot compare it. We cannot compare these things, right? Like the word for it is fungibility. It's not they're not fungible. Carbon CO2 here or CO2 there is fungible. Biodiversity is not. It is not comparable in principle. And that is the big challenge, right? Like we do not have a single metric for biodiversity that is really comparable. The other challenge we have in it is when actors outside of the actual land steward, of the actual people who are on the land and understand the land, get involved with setting the metrics and deciding what should be done. It is always problematic. So we have this in of course, EU subsidies, classic example, we've been doing this forever, that we try to tell farmers what they're supposed to do. It does not work, it has never worked, it will never work. We do not understand better than the farmers themselves what they are supposed to do for their land. They know, and they are the only ones who will know, because every piece of land is different, every microclimate is different, every soil is different, the rain patterns are different. We cannot from outside say, this is good. There is no single set of practices that are good. So the very strong argument would be, let's engage with the farmers and help the farmers identify what is fitting for their context and support them as they are doing that. So ask them what would constitute a healthy farm, and healthy means economically healthy, ecologically healthy, and socially healthy. And then what are the practices that you would implement for that? Biodiversity is part of it because A, farmers love it, and B, it is beneficial to their business. It is beneficial for the long-term business of their farm. So my very strong argument is yes, biodiversity, but the way to get to biodiversity is by asking farmers what would constitute a healthy farm for you, and then support them as they do that and trust them. And this is the very, very difficult thing that we always have in funding, is we tend to trust people that are purely profit maximizing. So you invest in your fund and you let them do their thing, right? Because they know what they're doing. We don't do that for the philanthropy side. We don't do that for the farmers. We don't do that for the conservation side. trust them in the way that you would trust your asset managers. They know what they're doing. So this is the tricky thing that where we're trying to build the systems to get there.
Mm-hmm. You've touched upon the biodiversity offsets, and I'd like to discuss that right after, but maybe first coming to Tanya. I think back to the topic of nature positive and having really a concrete positive impact with the project that you have, like how do you make sure that you have this positive impact? How do you get surrounded? How does that work in practice?
Well, one of the most important things is that we are not doing it by our own in the way, but we are cooperating with conservation organizations, so nature conservation organizations like BirdLife Austria. BirdLife is a quite well-known organization in Europe, and I already mentioned our pesticide reduction program for our fruit and vegetables, which we started and operate with Friends of the Earth. So I think this is quite important because they challenge us, yes, and they want to have an impact, and for that I think it's very important. So you really need experts, and these organizations, they do have experts, but you also need the farmers, because you have to convince them about the value what you are doing. And so you said they know it. Well, I have a little bit different experience. That it's quite important to give them professional help in some areas, not in their key production. They knew everything about that, but especially about biodiversity. Yeah, what kind of plants are really the best to how you say, to seed, yeah, or which seeds do you need for a good meadow close to your production and so on. So I think it's very good to support them, but you always have to ask them if they want it, yeah. And sometimes it's not so easy, especially with the representatives of of the agricultural chamber, because they think we now want to dominate this area as well, but we don't want to dominate it, but we are dependent on it, that we have a healthy nature to produce our products. And so I think it's collaboration is a key success factor, but money is important too. So we also have to convince other companies to support and to give money. And this is what we are now working on, that we ask other companies to join our foundation, so that we have a kind of a network, and then we can leverage much more money and other experts.
Yeah, I think in such a systemic issue, which is biodiversity loss, you need to have this collaboration with all of the companies, all of the people working there, for sure. So now getting a bit into the spicy parts of the panel discussion, I wanted to touch upon biodiversity offsets. So Ivo, you were mentioning it. I think it would be great to have your view, Paul, on that, both from like a compliance market. I know it's developing in the UK. There is a new law in this direction. There is also the voluntary market. Is there a space for biodiversity offset? Is there a space for biodiversity offset investments? What's your view on that?
Oh, big one. Well, what's exciting is that companies like Rowa are really thinking through the question of what is nature positive, and this is very smart, what you're doing, going outside with the community and creating something together, and that's the right way to go. What we want to avoid is all the mistakes of the carbon market, and I know that very well, having built big carbon programs. Most carbon programs are small, disaggregated, have different baselines, have all sorts of problems, and they're a good effort. We shouldn't disparage them, but the system is not very smart. So we've got an opportunity to design a biodiversity, a nature plus system for the planet that's better. And the fundamental rules are nature is not fungible. You can't destroy nature and replace it. You've got to always be adding back. That's the critical question. Biodiversity offset systems do exist around the planet. What the evaluations of them in the UK, biodiversity net gains in New South Wales and in California, is showing they're pretty bad. They don't work very well. They don't give results. so the companies that are paying for this are not getting the value for their money. What we're doing is advising at the moment the Irish government and the Queensland government in Australia in building a combined biodiversity and carbon payment system. In Ireland it's for peatland restoration. In Australia they've got a very good system that we're adding on to. And the critical question there is how to get everyone aligned into investing in restoring nature next to natural areas, building those corridors, connecting with farmers who are interested in renewing those patches of vegetation on the edge of their fields or in their farms. I was out in a river area in Queensland, out near Brisbane, and this is a big corporate agricultural corporation. They're losing money because the floods are stealing their fields, washing their fields away and washing the soil away. But by getting involved in tree planting, they protect their crops and they're getting benefits. So we're creating now an investment program for that entire river system that hopefully will affect the floods. What can we do here in Austria? Well, I think you've got the seeds already starting to come together. Yeah, so let's not make the mistakes of the carbon market. Let's think it through in a systematic way.
Maybe very quickly, Sylvia, your view on this as well. Are you using biodiversity offsets?
I mean, first of all, I think we need